The year is 1950. A small Victorian steam locomotive clatters slowly up the Fadu Valley, perhaps for the very last time. The engine and the rails beneath it seem almost in competition to see which one will give out first. Behind her is a single coach and a brake van. The railway's other locomotive, Talyllyn, already sits silent in the shed. Dolgoch, this tired little engine, is the last one standing. Like so many other railways across Britain, this one seems destined for the scrapyard. Looking at the train that day, you wouldn't think she had any future at all. But someone did, as on board that train were a handful of unusual passengers. A small group of pioneers who refused to let the railway die. And the locomotive at the head of the train, Dolgoch, would soon become far more than just another ageing engine. She would help start a movement. It may not have been the first narrow gauge line, it may not have been the biggest, but this tiny railway in South Eryri is considered the world's first steam-hauled, volunteer-preserved railway. This is the story of the Talyllyn Railway and its preservation pioneers. The railway that we call the Talyllyn emerged in the mid-1860s, but the origins of the line go back a little further. Mining in the hills above Abergynolwyn had begun some 20 years earlier, when workers toiled long and difficult hours, battling the elements, the rock and their health, all to deliver one thing: slate. And in this grey, barren landscape, high up in the hills, hidden in a shallow valley, is where our story begins. Some 8 miles from Tywyn lies Bryneglwys Quarry. It began in the 1840s when John Pugh, with a lease obtained from the local landowner, set to mine the veins that run through this part of mid-Wales. It was soon clear that this small stretch of mountainside would be the perfect place to extract slate. And so work began. The slate was extracted before being loaded onto wagons, then carried by horse down to the ports, the long march with slate being a particularly slow part of the process. That was until the 1860s, where events thousands of miles away would change the fortunes of the quarry. The McConnells, Manchester mill owners, were feeling the squeeze. The American Civil War had impacted on the cotton industry, so they looked to expand their portfolio. They looked towards Wales and its slate as a new way to bring in revenue. In 1863, the lease to the Bryneglwys Quarry fell to the McConnells, and the Aberdyfi Slate Company was formed. Work commenced on modernising the quarry, and they sought to meet the potential increased demand, which is where our railway story begins. Work began on building the line sometime around 1864. The surveying of the land would fall onto the Spooner family of Porthmadog. The Spooners, already experienced in narrow gauge railway management due to their work on the Festiniog, were the perfect candidates to help survey this narrow gauge line. It was to be steam hauled from the outset, with James Swinton Spooner, the engineer, tasked with the construction.
It was quite a rapid construction. The history of it has been a bit confused, and we don't know too much. This is one of the problems of our early history, is we have very little in the way of written records. Most of what we have is sort of put together from newspaper reports of the time. So what we can presume is that work started in several places. that the main construction area down here was at Pendray, what is now Pendray, and basically you had crews working in two directions. You had one crew working the way down towards here at Wharf, digging out what is now, the cutting between the two, and they would transport the waste from that up and away to form the embankment between Pendray and Rhydyfrolyn. And then quite probably there was another group working from here, sort of coming in the other direction, and obviously eventually they met in the middle. There was probably another construction base at what is now Bryneglwys, in the area there, and they were probably working up to the west end of Dolgoch Viaduct, and there was probably other group based at Abergynolwyn coming down the other way.
The line as we know it starts at the wharf in Tywyn. The initial plans to take the slate down to the ports were cut short as the recent main line split the town in two. The answer therefore was to not take the slate to the ships, but to the railway. A wharf was constructed at Tywyn, where slate could be stored then loaded onto waiting trains. The line then snakes through a cutting before emerging at the main engineering hub of the railway, Pendray. While not the original shed, it quickly became the centre of activity. This is where the passenger section of the line began, and where the locos were stored and repaired. With the 2 locos, 4 carriages, a guard's van, and some slate wagons to look after. The shed was originally backed by the home of William Bousted, an engineer sent down from Fletcher Jennings to help with maintenance and operation of the railway's locos. The cottage was passed down to the line in preservation, but it was knocked through to create a larger shed when the needs of the railway grew. From here, the railway breaks out into the countryside, past the small halts served only by the local farmers, through the little station at Rhydyfrolyn and up along the valley. The railway's midpoint is Dolgoch, where a rather impressive viaduct takes the train into a small platform, where passengers could alight to visit the waterfalls cascading down from the mountain. From Dolgoch, the line once again climbs up towards Abergynolwyn. Here, a small station platform would signal the end of the passenger section of the line and the beginning of the mineral line. The Talyllyn was among the first narrow gauge railways specifically authorised to carry passengers from the outset, and was passed as an Act of Parliament, with the Act finally signifying the name of the line, the Talyllyn Railway. From Abergynolwyn, the line changes somewhat. This is the main slate operation territory. Passenger stock would run as far as Abergynolwyn, with goods and slate travelling another mile along a private railway. This is where the initial engine sheds were housed, with water for the locos coming down from a trough connected to a stream in the mountains. Passing the sheds, the railway follows the cliff edge above the village of Abergynolwyn. As the railway was above the village and the station somewhat out of town, there was a need to bring goods and services more efficiently to the residents. The solution was a winding house and incline. That way they could take the goods down to the village and bring back empty wagons. And from here the line swings around a bend and into the sorting yards below the quarry inclines. The slate could then be brought down from the quarry and sorted into their respective trains.
We know that construction took around about a year, and it's one of the confusing things that trains were running, bringing the slate down, before the railway got its Act of Parliament. The usual thing in railway history is people assume that the Act of Parliament was got first, and then they built the railway. And certainly if you read Rolt's Railway Adventure, that's what he assumed, that they got the Act of Parliament and then built the railway. But in fact the railway was open for slate traffic by the time that they got the Act of Parliament.
The next question on the builders' minds would turn to not where to pull the trains, but who was to pull them. To meet the needs of the railway, they had a few criteria to fill. First, the loco had to be light, small, agile, and above all else, not too expensive. It had to be something they could use to carry both mineral and passenger stock. The solution was to be found in Cumbria. Fletcher Jennings & Co. Whitehaven was a company that built its reputation on industrial tank locos, They offered relatively cheap, light and powerful industrial locos, which would fit perfectly with the railway's needs. Initially, they ordered just one loco for around £500. However, the solo locomotive would become a duo. Two locomotives that share some similarities, but just as many differences. The first was an 040 saddle tank, based slightly on the already existing A-class, with a number of modifications, which makes her pretty much unique.
Yeah, loco number one, we know was completed in September 1864, but it didn't arrive here until spring of 1865. What happened to it in between those two dates is one of the interesting things that we don't know. And hopefully sometime some information will come to light which will tell us. It is more than likely that it came in by sea to Abu Dhabi and then came up on the mainline railway to here and was shipped off ready to go up the line. Of course, the line wasn't connected by that point, so in one sense, Wharf here was actually isolated. So unless they were prepared to take the loco up to Pendray by road, of which there's no record of that happening, the likelihood is it was just delivered here and when the line through the cutting was open.
Talyllyn, as the first loco was called, had an open cab with a weatherboard as her only defence against the Welsh weather. Right from the off, she was a little temperamental. Her 040 wheelbase meant that she initially rode rough over the track, and as such, was not particularly suitable for the job. She was sent back to Fletcher Jennings sometime after, where a set of trailing wheels were added. It was during one of these repairs that the railway went from one loco to two. A second was ordered from Fletcher Jennings, this time a B class. She was to be called Dolgoch.
Then number two, Dolgoch, that arrived in the summer of 1866, and that was probably in response to the need to have a second locomotive if they were going to get the Board of Trade approval to start running passenger services.
Little did anyone know that this second loco would become instrumental in the survival of the line at its darkest hour, and the name Dolgoch would become synonymous with railway preservation. There is no clear timeline for when the railway started working slate operations. However, by September 1866, the railway was complete enough for a full line inspection. It was inspected by Colonel Tyler, and while there was some positivity, there was much to be adapted before the line could be fully operational. One amendment required barring the doors on the south side of the carriages as a safety precaution. Again, no records exist of any celebrations when the line officially opened for passengers, but by the 21st of December, we know that officially the line was open. Both slate and passengers would now use this little line, linking the rural communities with Tywyn better than before. For the rest of the century, the railway's history was marked largely by quiet continuity. The railway appears in papers throughout the next 30 years, sometimes positive, sometimes negative. But the railway is categorised almost by its lack of fuss. By 1879, however, it was looking quite clear that while the line could tick along, the quarry's expectations for growth were grossly over-exaggerated.
Depends what you call a success. It wasn't a success in the sense of what the promoters originally hoped. but it certainly conveyed traffic, and of course it did connect the valley. It was, a major communication means up and down the valley, and getting news up and down the valley. I mean, the stories are told of when the Boer War ended and when the First World War ended, of locos going up the line whistling and whatnot and letting everybody know that peace had been declared, etc. So it was, in a sense, part of that, of the integral part of the community in that sense, and so provided a vital link. Profitability, marginal at best and not at worst. In 1881, I mean, they effectively bankrupted the whole thing, and then they put it all up for auction, and it was bought by another member of the McConnell family at that point, so it was sort of a bit of an interesting piece of financial sleight of hand.
Despite the change in ownership, the future was looking increasingly bleak. With the lease running out shortly, there seemed little reason to invest in the quarry and railway further. To save on costs, the decision was made to no longer sink new shafts or to dig further into the veins. Instead, they would carve out what they could from the very pillars that supported the mine. This inevitably caused issues and made the dangerous job even more so. By December 1909, the decision had been made and the quarry was to close.
McConnell's basically got fed up and felt that this was too much of a liability to keep on going. So they threatened to close it at that point, and there was a huge outcry in the community. Meetings were held and all sorts about, we must keep the quarry going, we must keep the railway going. And that was that point that a gentleman by the name of Henry Hayden Jones came on the scene.
Sir Henry Hayden Jones, Liberal MP for the area, purchased the quarry and set up a new company, the Abergynolwyn Slate and Slab Company. He did initially try to find a buyer, but after nobody came forward, he bought it himself. He then set to work bringing it back to life. The only problem was investment. While he did bring it back from the dead, there was little incentive to put more money than was absolutely necessary into the scheme. Trade increased during the First World War, but the revival was short-lived. And by the 1920s, Bryneglwys was once again producing only a modest output, and the funds steadily declined. The railway began to show its age. Talyllyn and Dolgoch, the two original locomotives, were now elderly machines. Yet they continued, doing the same job that they had been built for more than half a century earlier. The locomotive stock was worn, the track faulted and more. It had become a relic of a former time. Forgotten by many, you could have mistaken it for some long-closed line, so much so that some later Ordnance Survey maps show some of the stations as closed. Sir Hayden championed the railway, but his investment could only stretch so far, and each year what was available dwindled. By the mid-1940s, Talyllyn was increasingly unreliable. As there was no money to fix her, she was quietly pushed into the shed and left. It was now up to Dolgoch to run the line single-handedly. The lease for Bryneglwys ended in 1941 and was only extended on an annual basis, and within a few short years, the end became an inevitability. Boxing Day, 1946. The workmen arrived at Bryneglwys much as they always had, but something was wrong. Years of removing the quarry's pillars had taken its toll, and on that morning, a significant section of the mine collapsed. And with that, Bryneglwys came to a dramatic and rather underwhelming end. The quarry fell silent. Tools and equipment laid down by the workmen only a few days prior now remained in permanent limbo. By around 1948, the quarry was cleared of the remaining slate. The fate of the railway remained undecided. Sir Hayden had promised to keep the line open for as long as he lived, and that's what he did. But with a threadbare budget, Aging locomotives and crumbling stock, survival seemed precarious at best. It was during this time that a chance visit to the line changed its fortunes, and in turn kick-started a movement which would take over the world. In 1949, a visitor arrived who would change everything. His name was Tom Rolt. A writer and biographer, in 1949 he visited the railway and fell in love. This wasn't the first time he visited. A visit to the railway during the Second World War was met with a sign at the platform indicating that no trains were running that day. Despite this, his walk along the line in the late afternoon captured his imagination greatly. Now completely enthralled by the magic of the little railway, he sought to return in the future. It was quite a novelty to see such a private railway like this still in service. The Talyllyn had escaped being amalgamated into the Cambrian, and in turn grouping. And while Sir Hayden had tried, it was never nationalised. It would be such a shame to lose this unique railway. However, by 1950, it was looking likely that this would be the case.
Well, basically, Sir Hayden was keeping it going out of his own pocket. He was, subsidising it quite heavily if you look at the returns, and particularly when there was major expenditure. It really was a hand-to-mouth operation at that point, very minimal in terms of track replacement, loco work or anything like that. But he was keen. He said that was his promise when Tom Rolt and Bill Trinder first chatted to him. He said that was his intention to keep it going, and he kept that promise to the end. And of course, at that point, there was a real danger that it would close once and for all in October 1950, and the season ended.
Sir Henry Hayden Jones passed away in July 1950. The chances of survival looked even more bleak. The line soldiered on for the rest of the summer season, but by the end of the year, it was looking likely that this was now the end of the line for the little railway. The last service of the original Talyllyn Railway crept up the line in October that year. Dolgoch, a coach, and a guards van. A final journey for the Victorian time capsule. But this wasn't the end, and in many ways, this final journey was just the beginning. On that train was the aforementioned Tom Rolt, among others. Anxious to save what they could, a meeting was held in Birmingham mere days after the final train. The meeting had one aim: to save the railway in whatever way they could.
The initial meeting, October 1950 in Birmingham, there was about 40 there. I mean, you think it was a big meeting, it was only actually about 40 people who formed the society originally, and there was a lot of scepticism about it. And indeed, I mean, Tom Rolt's original idea was not to preserve the railway as it is, but actually was to keep the bit between Wharf and Pendray, and then to convert the rest of it to 15-inch gauge. And there's actually in our archive a whole business plan that he wrote for that. So this really was a serious suggestion that he was pursuing. But eventually other voices prevailed and said, if we're going to preserve it, let's preserve it as it is.
It was within these discussions that a new idea formed. Not to rebuild the railway into something new, or to lock it away in a museum, but to keep it alive and working, just as it always had. To bring back the Victorian time capsule for passengers to enjoy. While seemingly an impossible task considering the state of the line, this idea would win out. The true value of the Talyllyn was not in one thing, but a sum of all its parts. It had a true historical value as a private enterprise, still operating with original locos in stock. An agreement was immediately drawn between the committee and the estate of Hayden Jones to transfer ownership of the line to this new company, and its name, the Talyllyn Railway Preservation Society. In February 1951, the scheme was underway. They had little interest in preserving the quarry itself. However, the railway, track and locos were handed over to the pioneers. As they stood on Wharf platform on the first day of ownership, you can imagine the sense of excitement, and likely dread. Here we have a group of amateurs, a line that's crumbling into dust, 2 old and worn locos, and with only a small pool of money to do the work. What they needed was a plan, and what they came up with seems, on the outside, to be completely ridiculous. But it is this method which has stood the test of time, not just for the Tallyllyn, but for most preservation societies. The plan was for members to financially support the railway through donations and membership fees. And instead of a huge bank of staff in the traditional sense, workers at the railway would come as volunteers, described as an assembly of people of goodwill, donating their time and labour to keep the line operational. These early years were initially fraught with unknowns. Nothing quite like this had been attempted on such a scale before, and the chances of success were potentially limited. But their ambitions were great, and these volunteers knew that given half a chance, they could make a success of it.
So this phase, I mean, if you look at the phases of preservation, this first phase through the 50s really was the survival phase. It was, can we keep this railway running with this dire permanent way situation, with all sorts of issues, locos that, were on their last legs. I mean, the old lady, number 2, kept the line running famously, as we know, but I mean, she was in a pretty dire condition.
They started initially on the track work. The line was in a torrid state, and they had to get it into some sort of working order. Parties were set up to clear, bash and hammer the line into shape. In February 1951, articles appeared in the press asking for volunteers, donors, and above all, attendees for the grand opening under preservation hands, which was fast approaching. While the track could be repaired with a little hard work and determination, the loco side of things was a little more complicated. Number 2 was still somewhat operational. Number 1 Talyllyn was unusable. It was clear that if they wanted to make a run of things, 2 completely worn out locos were not going to be the answer. The pioneers went in search of new locos. Unfortunately for them, the solution was not going to come from far away, but from just over the valley. The Corris Railway was only a few miles away from the Talyllyn. It had operated until 1948, and just so happened to share the same gauge as the Talyllyn. Not only that, after its closure, instead of the loco stock being cut up and removed, they had hidden them behind the sheds at Bryneglwys. Both surviving locos were quickly snapped up for £25 and brought to their new home in Tywyn. By March 1951, the old, yet new locos had arrived. Both locos had numbers at the Corris. However, to reflect with the tradition at the new line, names were given, with 3, a Hughes Falcon taking the name Sir Hayden, with 4, a Kerr Stewart tattoo being called Edward Thomas, in respect to the last general manager of the line pre-preservation. While both locos were being prepared, it was up to Dolgoch to take the reins in the first few weeks, with the hopes that the new number 3 could fill out the roster. However, getting them both ready would prove far more complicated than the pioneers expected. The 14th of May 1951, the big day had come. The official running of trains under the new Preservation Society. On that bright Whitsun morning, Dolgoch brought its first train down to Wharf Station. While still a familiar sight, this revival brought a sense of newness to the town. Crowds gathered at the station ready for the off, with cameras at the ready. They watched in excitement as Chairman Bill Trinder readied the tape for cutting. And then, Ken Cope, the Preservation Society's first guard, waved his flag. Dolgoch was away up the Fadhu Valley, much as it had always done, but different from before. The first run did not go all the way to the top of the line, as work was still underway. The first train of the society ran only a few miles up to Rideronen. A A single siding and lack of passenger loop at this point meant that in order to move the loco to the rear of the train, some strategic shunting was in order, with images of the passengers pushing coaches out of the way so the waiting Dolgoch could come and recouple. Despite these idiosyncrasies, this marked an important point in the society's history. They proved that they could do it. They could run a train as a society, and from here, the sky was the limit. A few weeks later, the line was opened properly for the public season, with the 90-year-old Dolgoch taking up much of the strain. What they needed was for the newly purchased Corris locos to come into service. 3 and 4 came to save the line at its most precarious moment. Number 4, Edward Thomas, was initially planned as a more long-term project, so Hayden was to be brought in sooner to help the almost 100-year-old Dolgoch. However, it was quickly discovered that this new loco was going to cause more headaches than anticipated. The railway had been built to a 2-foot 3-inch gauge. However, there were some wider tolerances between the rails. 2 foot, 3 and a thumb is the common phrase. This meant that even during its testing phase, Sir Hayden had a knack for falling between the rails. This loco promised much to the railway. However, it was clear that if she was going to meet her potential, much work had to be done. The grand plan of having 2 working steam engines ready for the summer season was falling through rapidly, and it was up to the worn-out Dolgoch to keep the line running for just a little longer before she could finally have a long-deserved rest. This would come in 1952 when number 4 was finally brought into working order. Edward Thomas, practical, dependable, became the engine the railway could rely on. She ran the line almost single-handedly through the second season while the engineers worked on making 3 ready for the line. There's every chance that without this loco, the railway could have closed early into the society's life. But where Talyllyn was all but spent, Dolgoch not far away, and Sir Hayden unsuitable, Edward Thomas thrived. And with that, the railway continued to grow.
If the Corris locos hadn't been available, then probably it wouldn't have survived. But obviously with number 4 and number 3 becoming available, then that actually saved that situation at that point. And again, you know, there was some tremendous goodwill towards this thing, towards this venture. Number 4 was restored through the generosity of Hunslet. They did the majority of the work that was necessary to get it back into service again. And, you know, time and time again, the right people came up. Territorial Army came in, did an awful lot of work in terms of trying to get the permanent way sorted out. They did wreck most of the slate wagons in that process, but they, you know, again, without their help, probably it would not have survived. Major landslip at Dolgoch in the late 50s, which threatened the line. But we were very fortunate that by that point a civil engineer by the name of John Bate had become involved with the railway, and John oversaw sorting that out through volunteer labour, and again that's saved the line. And I mean, if the Talyllyn had failed through all that period, that probably would have had some fairly major implications for other heritage railways and other heritage railway schemes, because people would have said, well, hang on a minute, you know, the Talyllyn tried this and it failed. So the fact that it actually did succeed is part of that sort of heritage railway story about why we have so many heritage railways now, because it did succeed. People could see it could work, and so people were able to follow that model elsewhere.
The next decade was filled with many lessons, hard ones. From loco failures to the odd frayed temper of volunteer staff learning essentially as they go. There were many times in these few years where the project could have floundered, but continue they did. The railway eventually began to expand upon its roster, first with a new diesel Midlander, then number 6, Douglas, an Andrew Barclay tank loco with a tendency to rock and roll when racing up the valley. This loco was quite literally life-changing for the railway, as they had to reconstruct lines under certain bridges so a cab and funnel could fit through. There were some failed attempts to build some locos of their own, an original number 5 equipped with Rolt's old narrowboat engine, and a number 7 loco equipped with a unique method of turning the loco around to make up for its lack of tractive effort in reverse. There's a sense of almost conflicting emotion. They had a railway of their own, it had the potential to grow, but there was still the huge possibility that the scheme would falter. Even if they could get it off the ground, who was to say people would keep coming back? As the 50s rolled on, the railway started to really take shape. Edward Thomas, the loco that ensured the line's survival in the early years, was working hard. Sir Hayden was eventually taken away for a full rebuild, and Dolgoch too was given a hard-earned rest. But during this time, there was one loco whose life seemed all but over. However, the good fortunes of the line and enthusiasts interested in getting involved meant she too would return. By 1945, Talyllyn was exhausted. After nearly 80 years of work, the old engine was retired. Left abandoned in the sheds at Pendray, her boiler, which had been on her since construction in the 1860s, was completely worn out. The list of other problems made any attempts at overhaul unviable. When the society took over and new locos and stock started to make its way to the line, the need for shed space was at a premium. This meant that Talyllyn was slowly relegated to a small barn at the side of the line. At the time, the idea of ever steaming her again was out of the question. They simply lacked the funds and the means to do so. But as the railway grew, the opportunity to bring her back to life presented itself. She was taken away in 1957 to Gibbons Brothers to undergo a complete and total rebuild. Many of her life-expired features were removed and rebuilt, including a boiler, saddle tank, and bunker. She returned only a year later, not as she once was, but reborn. She was not without her faults and had to be amended several times over the years to improve on some of the choices made during this rebuild. But by the 1980s, many of her problems were solved, and she has continued to be an important part of the fleet. She has the claim as being one of the oldest surviving locomotives still in regular use. An incredible achievement for a society which briefly considered her for a museum. The railway grew in visitors with television broadcasts and the popularity of the Reverend Wilbur Awdry's railway series providing ever-increasing numbers of passengers and volunteers. And with that, the line, which seemed all but lost, was operating as an efficient passenger-carrying service. The line was renewed as far as Abergynolwyn. The locos were running better than ever, and the society was growing. But they weren't done just yet. Beyond the station at Abergynolwyn, unknown to many casual passengers, was a mile or so of railway. While the station was for all intents and purposes the end of the line, as it had always been for passengers during the early years, there was the rest of the mineral section up to the foot of the inclines leading up to Bryneglwys Quarry. This included the original watering stop, the location of the first set of sheds, the winding house down to the village of Abergynolwyn, and more. The decision was made to extend the line to its true endpoint, to Nant Gwernol. The project, like many in preservation circles, was a long and complicated process. Ensuring the land could be used, disputes over what the final station would look like, and how to access the station itself were all hurdles they had to overcome. Even when they had these issues worked out, they still needed to relay and rebuild the track. As it was a mineral line with no passenger carrying service, it was built to a much different standard to the section between Tywyn and Abergynolwyn. The winding house atop of the incline towards the town was in disrepair, and no coach could navigate through. the decision was made to demolish the old building, leaving the frames of the drum in place. The whole section had to be widened with significant blasting and earthworks to be done. By 1970 they were ready and work commenced, with the first blast coming from the hands of Tom Rolt himself. Over the next few years, the builders, affectionately called Gwyrns, blasted, laid and built the final length of the line. And by 1976 the section was ready, with television presenter Winford Vaughan Thomas, the guest of honour, on a resplendent Dolgoch. Passengers travelled beyond Abergynolwyn and onto the old Mineral Railway. Since then, the railway has continued to grow slowly and steadily, introducing new locos and stock to the fleet. In the 1990s, the railway finally steamed a long-term project, the railway's new number 7. Built from an old Bordner Mona loco, she came from a need to grow the loco stock as the popularity of the railway grew. She was to be built in-house over a period of 30 years, the project spearheaded by engineer John Bate. In 1991, the new number 7 made its way down to Wharf Station for its grand unveiling, looking completely different to the original engine that went up to Pendray all those years ago. And in keeping with tradition, this number 7 was to be given a name. And what better way to commemorate the pioneers than that of the man who most famously spearheaded its survival, Tom Rolt. This loco was proof that the railway was no longer just preserving history, but making it themselves. It's in these locos where you can really see the history of the line. Talyllyn, the flawed pioneer, rebuilt and reborn. Dolgoch, the survivor, who kept the line running during its most desperate hour. The chorus locos, demonstrating the pioneering spirit. Through to number 7, a true Talyllyn loco, and a show of the railway's stability leading into the modern millennium. The stations have been upgraded and improved upon, with better facilities and further integration of the narrow gauge museum at Tywyn. The railway has rarely stood still, always building and always improving. And while not everything can be saved, the railway still understands that preservation isn't simply in keeping hold of the past, but building for the future. With thousands of members and a good roster of volunteers, the line clearly has a special place in many people's hearts. But what is it that drives people to the railway?
I came here as a visitor in 2021. I came here for a little bit and thought, okay, yeah, it's actually nice here. Then I came back with a few others in 2022, but I tried volunteering. I actually really enjoyed it. I couldn't do much at that time because I had to finish off an engineering course. So I came back the next year and I really enjoyed it. And unfortunately, I've become a part of the furniture and I can't leave. So I do loco department, mostly loco department anyway. And unfortunately for them, I quite enjoy it. I quite enjoy it. It's really good. And I don't think I really want to do anything else. I'd rather loco department. That's where I belong, I suppose. It's such a great community. It is such a great community. The atmosphere, the people here, 9 times out of 10 you come across some people and they are absolutely fantastic. I got no quarrels with them at all. You feel safe. You feel wanted, and the main thing is everybody here looks after each other. Like management especially, they do look after their volunteers. I'd be lying if I said they didn't. The amount of times where I've needed help and management, 9 times out of 10, they've always been there to save the day. I can't fault them. Same with the volunteers. There's been a lot of volunteers here where I've been in a bit of a rut, and they've saved the day. They've genuinely, I can't thank them enough. They've made me feel welcome. They've made me feel safe here, like.
Yeah, I mean, it gets in your blood. I think one of the key things we've said, it's the people as much as the railway. I mean, the railway is really nice, but the people make it. And I mean, said I've been here, 50 odd years out of the 75 years of preservation, which is a bit horrifying to think about in one instance. But there's obviously people I've grown up with, and there are people, who've been coming that period of time. We're now, I think, in our at least fourth generation of volunteers in certain families, if not the fifth. So, it has that continuity and people here and whatnot. And it does make the place, and I'm really pleased, that the place is a place that people come for all sorts of different reasons, and they volunteer, and they find it, a really beneficial experience. And obviously, we've had youngsters who've come here, who've gone on into the industry and other industry and become quite sort of high-powered. We have seen people come here and have their lives turned around. We have had young offenders here who have had their life transformed because of their experience of volunteering here. So, that to me is as important as actually preserving the actual physical assets.
This railway holds so much in terms of history. We were the first preserved steam railway in 1951. We have history of other railways here, as in we have Corris Railway history here. To an extent, we have Glyn Valley Tramway history here. We have, it's not that, I suppose it's not that historic, but a lot of people like it. We have R&AD history here, as in, the Bagleys and a bunch of wagons from down that way. Obviously, there's the Audrey connection. This is how I first found out about the railway, is the Audrey connection, and obviously, big fan of Thomas the Tank Engine when I was younger. As a lot of people were here, big fan of Thomas the Tank Engine when we were younger. Coming here in a volunteering stance, it can be a life changer. It can really be a life changer. Like me coming up in 2021, originally I weren't going to, because I was really in a bad position. I was in a bad way, and I was very, very down. But I said, no, do you know what? Right, okay, it'll get me away from down South Wales, innit? It's changed my life, especially in 2022. Changed my life. It's made me mature as a person, volunteering here, working with all sorts of people. Yeah, I'm still a bit nervous working with people, but that's just a me thing. But I'm still getting on with it. It's been an absolute game changer, and I recommend it to anybody who wants to come here, put the effort in, work with steam engines, because that's the big one, working with historic steam engines. And it's just an absolutely fantastic place. I would highly recommend it if you can, or even if it's your local heritage railway as well. Got to give support to your local heritage railway, not just us. Remember that. It is your local ones that matter too.
There are many claims to fame with the Talyllyn, from having one of the world's oldest locomotives in regular use, to TV and book appearances. It continues to be an inspiration to many. However, where you see its influence the most is in almost every other heritage railway that has followed in its footsteps. The model of volunteer-run services may seem a strange concept. Who would want to spend their free time working in this way? The early starts, the long hours, the grit, the dirt, the hard work. But many people do. Because it's not just work. It's friendship, camaraderie, skills and more. It's knowing that whether you've been with the Talyllyn for many years or a newcomer, you are part of a long line of volunteers who have taken a bit of their time to keep a little bit of Welsh history alive for future generations. For every single person who volunteers is part of the pioneers. Unlike those who came up with the idea in the first place, it's these new pioneers who continue to bring the line forward into the modern age.
It is one of these things of this concept of people giving up their time freely. I mean, certainly in the early 50s was something really quite novel. Because obviously, in many senses in the world up until, to that point, life was fairly hand to mouth. You worked umpteen hours a week, so you didn't have the free time to come and do something else. Taking a weekend away and coming and particularly if you were coming to do the work that you did the rest of the week, which was what happened in many cases.
In 1951, a handful of enthusiasts believed they could save a dying railway. What they created instead was a movement. Today, hundreds of heritage railways across the world follow the same model of volunteers, preservation and passion. And it all began here, in a quiet Welsh valley with 2 tired locomotives and a few people who refused to let them die.
Narrow gauge is all the rage, come ride the little train. Not a dream but living steam in glory once again. Bright painted little engines, wheels riding narrow rails. Piston steam and brasses gleaming, great little trains of Wales. Talyllyn the fair